Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion. We're now on the third episode of Season 1 of Everybody Loves Raymond. I Wish I Were Gus. Now, if I were to do a top 10 of my favorite episodes of the season, this would definitely be in there because of the early episodes, as in the Disc 1 episodes. This is definitely one of the better ones. It has a simple plot, just like the previous episodes, but this is one where we start to get a little bit more character development out of the characters. But like the development in the previous episode, it's never really brought up again, and that's mainly because Aunt Alda is never mentioned again, and she's never seen again. The latter is a bit more understandable considering she's played by guest star Gene Stapleton of All in the Family fame, which, even though All in the Family was about a decade removed by the time this episode was filmed, I'd like to imagine she still did have a slightly hefty price tag compared to some of the other guest stars for this season. And because of that, they could only get her for one episode. Or, and this is probably a bit more likely in the writing department, they just had her just be a one-off character and they just didn't bring her up again. Even though there are times in other episodes that they could bring her up. But it seems most of the family episodes seem to reflect more on either the Barone side of the family, as in Frank's side of the family, or they go and jump to Deborah's family. Because we never really see or hear much about Marie's side of the family. And they don't confirm it in dialogue, but I'm assuming based on what little is said in exposition that Uncle Gus is supposed to be an uncle on Marie's side of the family. Because most of the people we see at the funeral outside of our main characters, and of course Alda, we never see or hear about again after that funeral scene. And Alda we only see until the end of the episode. After that, every other time there's a family gathering, it's usually friends and then relatives who are confirmed to be on the Barone side, like Uncle Mel. Which Uncle Mel was a very interesting and fun little side character. It's like stuff like that, you could have gotten Alda back for little scenes like that. But I guess probably scheduling would also be another issue. I mean, that's why we lost Leo. Now, as you could probably guess from the fact I mentioned a funeral in the title of the episode, this episode involves a death. It's the death of a character we have not seen before this. A character they made up just for this episode, but extended family member. It is Ray's great Uncle Gus. He has passed away, and per his will, Ray has to write his eulogy, which Ray freaks out the moment he hears that. At first, he's like, "Oh, Uncle Gus died. I always thought it was his grandson." The moment that he's told he has to write the eulogy, he flips and goes, "What? I hardly knew the guy." Which I can relate to. Ray might be a writer, but there is a difference between writing something that's meant to be read in a paper and writing something and reading it yourself in front of people. And it kind of reminds me of Stephen King in one of the Dark Tower novels, how he writes regarding the fictional version of himself is that he finds it difficult to tell stories, which is kind of weird considering that he is an author. But in that case, he's comparing writing out a story that's going to be published later after being revised and edited versus trying to explain something orally, kind of like how I'm doing to you. Now, with that, I do relate with Ray because I find public speaking a bit hard even if I have the thing right in front of me. And that is different than what I'm doing right now with all you, even though I'm coming up with this off the top of my head, even though I do have slight notes up here. And that is, with this, it's almost like you're talking by yourself, and the only slight nerve is the fact you have the camera there, and for my setup, I'm actually looking at myself. Whereas when you're in a group of people, it's like, take this camera and magnify it. It's like, where do I go? And there's also added nerves. And of course, that nervousness on Ray's part is where we get the title of the episode, I Wish I Were Gus, which he actually tells Deborah in dialogue. Now, this would work for a main conundrum for a plot where Ray is so nervous he's trying to write the eulogy and he just can't get it right, and then he goes up there and makes an ass out of himself. But instead, it's more a secondary thing in the back that's his personal dilemma until his mother comes in at the beginning of the episode and announces that her sister, Alda, is going to be coming to the funeral. They haven't seen each other in years, not since Ray and Deborah's wedding, which outside of the proposal mentions in episode 1, this is the first mention of the wedding, and we're not actually going to see the wedding until the finale of the second season, so that's going to be something to talk about. Which, as an aside, it's like they couldn't get Gene back for a background role in that episode, but I guess they figured there's so many people, no one's going to be looking for Jean anywhere in that episode, especially since with how they describe where she was in this episode. It wouldn't surprise me if even during the wedding she's supposed to be off in the Tulies. Now, Marie has had an issue with her sister since the wedding because her sister did not bring a wedding gift, and she complained the whole time because of where she was sat at the wedding reception, which I have to agree with Marie on this, because if there's other people that actually have physical reasons for why they have to take precedent over you in the seating arrangement, you bite the bullet and get over it like a big girl. Which, speaking of big girls, part of the reason was one of Marie's cousins, 300-pound nutritionist, but the way that Marie describes it, it sounds like that her cousin brought her daughter without being an invite. Which that makes me wonder, why would they bring her in? I'm guessing she brought her as her plus one, so that's why she was like, that's another 2 seats. It could also just be her just saying it to try to make herself seem a little bit more important, which is in keeping with Marie's character, so anything's possible on that front. Marie does not want to see Alda, which is why she doesn't want to go to the funeral, which leads to the conundrum that Ray has to crack in the first part of the episode, and that is try to talk Marie into going to the funeral and try to make up with Aunt Alda, which leads to Marie scolding Ray and then kicking him out of her house, which leads to him going, if you don't stop this, no one at this funeral is going to have a good time. Which some might say, having a good time at a funeral? More so at the party after the funeral, I'd say you'd have a good time, but that's more because you're talking about the person who passed, reminiscing about them, not mourning, celebrating their life. I mean, personally, that's what I would want. Of course, we don't see the wake, we only see the funeral. Then we get there, we are introduced to Aunt Alda, and she does get a good reaction. Before I found out who she was played by, I always wondered why the audience was reacting the way they were. They usually always react when it's a big name who's doing a guest star spot. Like, we'll see that a lot in this season when we see the sports names appear in the opening scene. They'll always applaud like that, but here it was a bit more than some of these ones. Part of that, I believe, is because Jean, being a big sitcom name from All in the Family, even though it's 10 years removed, still had that appeal when they saw who was playing Aunt Alda. They're like, oh yeah, yeah. And of course, this is not the first time Doris Roberts and Jean worked together. I haven't seen the movie they were in together. From what I've read, I don't think they shared that many scenes in that movie, but you can definitely tell they at least knew each other off camera from there, because they do have a pretty good chemistry here as bickering sisters. Their dialogue back and forth trying to top the other and drawing attention to themselves. You do believe them as bickering siblings. And of course, Ray trying to do the eulogy. You can definitely tell he did not finish it and is trying to fly off the seat of his pants. Some of what he has works for a eulogy, but the bickering does play into his favor because he does come out and say something that he knows for certain Gus would want, and that is that family is important. Life's too short to just hold on to grudges until it's too late to make up for. It's like, he always cared about family. And then he even points out the obvious, and there's like, he didn't hold on to grudges and all that. He liked all his family. He points around, we're proof of that. And then points out, one day we're all going to be Gus. Do you really want to hold on to your grudges? Which, to a point, I agree with him with. It's kind of pointless to hold on to grudges. But there are certain circumstances where forgiving a relative is impossible. Without getting into too much, for me, that would be my mother. Let's just say relapsing and theft do not work. That's all I'm going to go into it in this video. That too many chances, you are not going to be forgiven. Now, after the eulogy, Ray does talk his mother and his aunt down and get them to forgive each other, which, of course, through dialogue, they start getting into another little disagreement. And the reason he has to play peacekeeper after this is because Aunt Alda turns part of the funeral party against Marie because of the wedding. People saying, oh, the cake was stale, the food portions were small and all that. Which this isn't brought up again in the episode revolving around the wedding, which I'm guessing they decided to retcon that out there, or they hadn't thought enough ahead of time about the wedding at this point. Because the way that the wedding episode in the future makes it sound like is that the planning was all done by Deborah and her parents. But considering another episode in the future also mentions that Frank chipped in to pay for Ray's wedding and also for Robert's first wedding, it would make sense that there would be some planning there, and that from the sound of things, Marie did cheap out on the wedding. At least in certain aspects, flat champagne, the cake not being up to par. Which, since I don't hear Deborah complaining about it, it could be also that those guests just happen to get the bad pieces, and Alda's using that to her advantage because she knows that. As for the cold veal, it's like, well, unless you have the food over a burner, some of the food's gonna chill. And she does seem like the type of person that's gonna complain about every little small detail, even if it's supposed to be normal. That's right, Aunt Alda sounds like one of those Karens that'd be like, "Where's your manager?" Or at least that's how she comes out to me, and Jean does play her very well. All in all, like I said, of the first few episodes, definitely one of my favorite ones. Sad that Alda's never seen again. Nice little character development for Marie and for Ray. Not so much with Frank. It's just, we do see that he really does hate it when Marie doesn't cook. And makes you wonder, what does he do when he has to feed himself? There's one of the nice little gag I do love, and that involves a Hitler mustache, where Ellie does draw on, I think it's Michael's face? I don't know, it was Jeffrey's face. And the Hitler stash, and this joke does pay off at the funeral when they pass some of Gus's friends who were World War II buddies, and they're all in uniform, and they see Jeffrey, and they're like, ah, ah. Always makes me smile when I see that. And of course, after this, we're going to get episode 4, which is an episode I don't think they would have done in later seasons. So, like the first 2 episodes, the perfect season 1 episode. It is a pretty funny one. I'm not sure if I would put it in the top 10. I haven't rewatched it. That, of course, is Standard Deviation. Time for an IQ test.